Hello, I want to tell you a little bit about the program on our November 12th concert titled Beethoven and Mozart. We actually have three composers on this concert. Of course, Beethoven, Mozart, and also Toronto composer LARYSA KUZMENKO is represented by a short piece of hers. The two composers, Beethoven and Mozart, functioned as composers quite differently. Mozart's ideas, Mozart's melodies basically poured out of his pen. He could write very quickly and beautifully, and hardly needed to go back and to do revisions. And in his very short life, he gave us over 600 works, whereas Beethoven worked much slower. So we have on the program his second piano concerto. That's the title, as it was published as his second concerto, but in fact it's the first concerto that he wrote, and it is his very first orchestral work that he completed. Mozart's is the last string quartet he ever wrote, and he died shortly after, in a year after it was composed. So both works are important in the lives of these composers. Beethoven was, as a young man, as a teenager, was already a very fine, accomplished pianist. He could play. He had already done quite a few public performances. So by the time he moved from Bonn to Vienna, he was trying to uh, get to be known in Vienna, and already trying to see that as a pianist he can have success. And he got to study composition with Haydn. He took a few lessons from Haydn in Vienna, but it wasn't very fruitful. And he continued with Albrechtsberger, a composer in Vienna, and he was a fine teacher and a taskmaster, and he really made a big impression on Beethoven and taught him all kinds of compositional techniques, particularly in writing in counterpoint. And he also a bit studied with Salieri. So he got a good education as a composer. The piano concerto that today we know as B flat major, the second piano concerto, is a work that he composed over few years. Basically, it took him 4 years to work on it, and then by the time it was premiered in 1795, he wasn't even done completely. He hadn't even written the piano part. And so he worked on it a bit, 6 more years, and finally he sent it in 1801 to his publisher to be published. And at that point, it got published as the second piano concerto. So in Beethoven is trying to make acquaintances in Vienna, and finally a good break came to him. The Viennese Composers Society was having an important concert in Vienna Burgtheater, and there Beethoven was invited to perform, and we think that it was the B flat major concerto in 1795 that he premiered in March of 1795. And but we were not 100% sure. It could also be the C major concerto at that point. The concerto is very much written in a Mozartian style. For any composer to write in Vienna in the shadow of Mozart would be a difficult task. And so Beethoven pays his respect to Mozart, Haydn, classics. But even in this first orchestral work, um, he is already showing what is to come. He for one thing, orchestral introduction is long, and even in the introduction, he is already going into minor mode, changing the key signatures, and he is already trying to show his individuality, particularly in the second movement. In the second movement, he almost sounds like he's preparing for a cadenza towards the end of the piece of the movement, but then he starts this very pensive, simple piano solo that is not fireworks that one expects in cadenzas. No technical show off. The third movement is a beautiful rondo, and it catches the ear, and it's a short 5-6 minute long movement, but it makes a great impression on the audience, and it in 6/8 rhythm, very easy to remember and to hum on your way out of the hall. Um, so Beethoven wrote very slowly, as I said. He worked on every note, whereas Mozart could write things so quickly, and the output it shows. Beethoven wrote 5 piano concertos, whereas Mozart wrote 27. In terms of string quartets, Beethoven wrote 15, Mozart wrote 23. So it's the 23rd, the last one that we play on November 12th. And in terms of symphonies, 9 symphonies by Beethoven, whereas we have 41 symphonies from Mozart. So it shows the volume of the work that Mozart could do in such a quick time. The second half of the concert begins with a work by LARYSA KUZMENKO, a Toronto composer who teaches at the University of Toronto. And it is a work titled A Prayer. This is a work that LARYSA was inspired to write after the passing of her father. So I'm sure it's a very personal expression for her. And it has, in the beginning, we have this very pensive liturgical atmosphere, and then it is interrupted with a quicker section with uneven beats. So we have a lot of 5/8, 7/8, 6/8 alternating, and probably this is something that her father liked very much, these rhythms. And then it concludes with a same kind of ending as in the beginning, a very pensive and very reflective work. We follow the LARYSA KUZMENKO's A Prayer with Mozart's last string quartet, the 23rd string quartet. Mozart wrote this work in 1790, and it is part of the Prussian string quartets. Mozart suffered from depression in his final few years, ill health of his wife Costanza, and also constant problems with money. He couldn't manage well money. He got paid often, but he was a big spender, and the things were up and down. He was always owing money, borrowing money. So he made a couple of trips to Berlin to meet the Prussian king, King Frederick Wilhelm II. He is now known as the person who built the famous Brandenburg Gate. And this king was a amateur cellist, but a good one, and liked very much music. He often attended, and his court employed a director of chamber music activities. And this was a person by the name of Duport, who also was a cellist. So in the first trip, we don't think that Mozart was able to meet with the king, but he probably met with Duport, and Duport offered some works, 6 works to be written, 6 string quartets, and Mozart was able to complete only 3 of them. There's a second trip that Mozart makes. So at the end of the first trip, he announces that he is going to get well paid for these works, the 6 works, and that he will make a certain amount of money. And so he makes a second trip, and he he comes back from that second trip with very little money. And a strange thing about it is that there are no records of the court in the court of the Prussian king's court of any money being paid to Mozart. So we don't exactly know what happened. There are theories about it, and one theory is that Mozart came back with very little money that he borrowed from someone else, and instead of going to Berlin, perhaps on the way he met another lady and had an affair. We simply don't know. This part is just a speculation. In terms of the string quartet, written in a year where he is in already poor health and worried about all kinds of personal problems, it is a year that he's not very active, he's not very productive. So the string quartet that we will play at this concert is a work that is written in circumstances that are a bit unusual for Mozart. The first movement is titled, the rhythmic definition is Allegro moderato. And it is basically the most democratic string quartet up to date, probably, because here he starts this beautiful quartet with quartet concertant. It's a form that was very popular in Paris and still popular in Berlin. So what quartet concertant is that it features each individual playing the melody, whereas the rest, the other 3 players are simply accompanying the melody. So we see this immediately in the beginning and in the first movement especially. And Mozart treats all 4 voices equally and gives tremendous amount of attention to the cello. A lot of the tunes that violin and viola plays, cello also has them and repeats them. Perhaps that was an effort to keep the king, who was an amateur cellist, and Duport, who was a cellist, happy. We don't know what was in his mind. The second movement is here there is indecision on the part of Mozart. He marks the score andante and also allegretto. And it's a movement where it's written in 6/8 rhythm, where the mood is somewhere between happiness and sadness. It's a movement of indecision. We don't know where it goes. This also happens in the first movement. There are places where Mozart wants to express his energy, but there are places where there are tremendous of hesitation in his part. And the first movement, actually, I should have mentioned that a bit earlier, the first movement ends in a surprising way. It winds down and ends softly. The second movement is the Sicilian rhythms, but it fluctuates in mood back and forth. The third movement, minuet, is interesting. Here we have a lot of grace notes. In the first movement, in the first introduction of the minuet section has this 3/4 rhythm and a lot of grace notes that we play them on the beat. Whereas in the trio section, we have grace notes that feels like it should be played before the beat. It's a very interesting effect that Mozart creates with these grace notes. And also in the trio section, we have uneven amount of bars. We have phrases 7 bars long. So it's a bit unusual movement. The fourth movement is a tour de force for any composer. Here he has this descending 16 notes pattern that circulates throughout the piece, basically throughout the movement, and he also converts it and the sentence and starts this fugal sections and counterpoints in increasing frequencies. First 1 bar off, and then half a bar off, then an 8 bar off, 8 beat off. So it is a amazing movement, complex, and then there are the fermatas, sudden stops and hesitations, and then restarting again. So it's a great work. We play this work with in orchestra version, of course, as a string orchestra, because it's symphonic music practically. So for us, for this concert, we also have a wonderful guest pianist to play the piano concerto, DUNN, and the concert is going to be a great celebration of these two composers, two important works in their output. I hope to see you there. Thank you very much.